Welcome. I'm Kent Davy, and this is North Country Roundtable, and I'm joined today by Councilman Ryan Keim with a Meet the Council presentation. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. Can you give us an idea of what District 3 is? What does it look like? What's the inherent characteristics of District 3?
It's very unique because we go from the coast all the way to the eastern borders. And so it's one of the only districts, I think the only district that really does that. So obviously with that type of geography changes, we're gonna have different concerns with the residents. But I think it's a fantastic district. You really get a good mix, but it's challenging. You know, we have different issues in Ocean Hills that you have in South O, and they're all very important. And but it is a very diverse district.
And you joined the council when?
I was appointed in January 2019.
And stood again for election in 2020?
Correct.
Okay. Could you give us a thumbnail description or history of who are you?
I grew up in Oceanside. I came here when I was a couple years old, stayed for college. I think once you've lived in North County, it's hard to go somewhere else. I mean, even for college, I didn't want to go too far. And so after that, just out of college, I joined the Oceanside Police Department.
You were a Cal State San Marcos grad. What was your major?
Political science.
Okay.
So I didn't have any idea to actually get into politics, so I wanted to go to law school instead.
You end up joining the Oceanside Police Department. So did you have to go through police academy after college then?
Yes, you do.
Over at Palomar then?
No, so there's a regional academy and it's in Miramar.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what happens to you after or with the Oceanside Police Department service, and then what happens?
So Oceanside Police Department, I was there about 10 years. I've worked in a multitude of different units. I think one of the most rewarding was we have a unit called the Neighborhood Policing Team. And what it is, it's a problem-solving unit. So you deal with long-term issues in neighborhoods and try to find lasting solutions. Because, that's one of the challenges with responding to calls as an officer. Sometimes you have a very limited amount of time, and they're temporary fixes. So this was more about actually finding a long-term solution. And with this, we've really got to build great relationships with many of the neighborhoods. We spend a lot of time at the resource centers with children, whether it's elementary school, middle school, or high school, and trying to build those bonds and enhance the trust and transparency in the police department. So it was very rewarding.
Very nice. And as I understand, you were injured on duty.
Correct. I was injured. I had to retire early.
Okay. So then what happens to you?
So I was lucky enough to become the spokesperson for Oceanside Police Department, and then eventually the public affairs director for San Diego County Sheriff's Department and the sheriff's spokesman. So it was a big jump. I mean, Oceanside, we're a fairly large department, but when you go to something like the sheriff's, where they run the county jails and the courthouses, it was a steep learning curve.
You still do that?
No, I do not.
Okay. What brought you to politics in Oceanside?
For me, it was a kind of an extension of what I did on the neighborhood policing team. And it really, put it simply, is solving problems.
Okay.
And so, it's enjoyable when you actually get to make some progress and try to address some of these things that you've seen for most of your life and things that you think could be done better, and to actually have a chance to make a difference with that is really rewarding.
If you were to give Oceanside grades right now, what kind of a grade do you give Oceanside?
That's a broad question. There's a lot of different categories. So I think just in quality of life, which is everything that you do as a council member or as a decision maker for policy should be to improve the quality of life. I mean, it really comes down to that. So no matter what it is, whether it's traffic or development or law enforcement, everything goes back to that, is how good of the quality of life is for our residents. I think right now we are, I want to say A, but there's room to improve. I could give us a B+. Okay. We have some big challenges that we need to address.
Let's talk about the challenges that you see. What would the number one thing that you think Oceanside needs to focus on ought to be?
Specifically, I think we need to address our homeless crisis. And this is not just Oceanside. I mean, we're unique in that we've really kind of been at the forefront of this for a few decades. But as you've seen it kind of explode through California, it becomes more apparent that we have to do something more and something different. And
during the Obama administration, the federal government went to a housing first policy. house people, then worry about the various ills, social problems that they may have. That has created tension, at least with certain groups, like Solutions for Change, saying we don't want alcohol or drug-dependent people next to our families with kids in them, so on and so forth. So they've been left out of the federal money for that. Is that a policy that makes sense to you? And where do we start going to try and get our hands on this?
So I'll address the housing first issue. I think, and I said this at our last council workshop when we were approving a homeless shelter, is there's room. Homelessness is such a diverse problem with so many different reasons why someone could be facing homelessness that I think we need as many people at the table as we can. So obviously housing first works for a certain group of people, but we have to have more than that. And that really lets you tackle those issues. And housing first, I think there's different ways of doing it where a lot of the times some of our most challenging situations or individuals need a safe place to stay while they either get substance abuse counseling or mental health treatment. So, but then I think that's the question is how long, where do you go from that? And when, how important is it to have long-term substance or alcohol-free housing? And, so I think it's finding that happy medium where you can get someone in a safe spot. They might not be sober yet, but once you have them, then you can work on those issues.
There are plans for the shelter underway. Is that going to be enough for the city of Oceanside?
I don't know. And that's going to be the challenge. I think, we have to be careful. I want to make sure that a shelter doesn't draw a large number of people from outside our city. We don't have the biggest tax base. We don't have the means to solve Southern California's homeless crisis. So my goal is really focusing on Oceanside residents or those people that have a nexus to Oceanside. So initially it's going to be 50, and it's going to be, like many problems, we think we're going to have to just reassess and see where we're at after, the first quarter, 2 quarters, and see what our challenges are. Are the beds full? Are they not? Are we really able to make a dent?
One of the things that Oceanside did that is, I don't know how innovative, but it struck me as innovative, was its police department's homeless, I don't know what you call it, the homeless contact team.
Homeless outreach team.
Outreach team. Can you tell us a little bit about how, from your perspective as former police officer, how successful that process is?
And that's one of the challenges, is how do you measure success? Mm-hmm. Is it getting someone into long-term supportive housing? Is it getting people services? So what is that? We were one of the first police departments to do it. And we really did kind of set the bar. And we have, our team's been, I know the officers well, and they just are very committed to trying to make that progress. I think one thing you'll hear from the most is it could take 10, 15, 20 contacts with somebody before they trust you enough to provide services. But this is what the great thing is, there's so many different issues that could be causing someone to remain in that cycle of homelessness. One example is they might not have an ID card or a driver's license and not able to receive benefits. Mm-hmm. So the hot team could take them to the DMV and get that and start chipping away at the little issues they have. And that's how you kind of address the problem one person at a time and one issue at a time.
Is there a role for the average Oceanside citizen that they ought to think about stepping up to try and help this problem themselves?
Just become more involved and partner, work with the police department. There's nonprofits. There's a lot of different ways to help. It's just that I think this is the issue I hear most from constituent contacts, emails, phone calls, is our homeless crisis. And I think this year especially. We just with the pandemic. One of our challenges was our San Diego County jails, I think about 5,800 beds throughout the county. Those were, before the pandemic, they were hovering around 98, 99% capacity. At the height of it in mid-2020, I think they got down to between 30 and 40%. Mm-hmm. And that's a challenge because when you have, 1 in 3 of the inmates in our county jails take a daily psychiatric medication. Mm-hmm. So when you have, and a lot of those inmates, when they're released without those supportive services, that's why I think you saw the huge explosion we saw in unsheltered homeless on the street.
And don't I recall that someplace between 50 and 70% of everyone convicted or put into jail has got an alcohol or substance abuse issue somehow related to that activity that got them there?
Yeah, so you'll hear different numbers about how many people test positive once they're in custody. There's a lot, but I think 50 to 75% could be a safe bet.
Yeah.
It would just be a guess, but.
That creates an economic impact in several different ways, not only the outlay for services provided by the city, but also its indirect impact on the way people react. Oceanside is changing and has changed immensely in the last 20 years or so. When you start to look forward into Oceanside, what do you see this city becoming?
We're growing, but I think we're staying. We're an eclectic, warm town that I think everyone feels welcome in, and so it's important to me that we keep that. I mean, we are. I mean, that's a challenge for me as we grow and develop to keep our unique neighborhoods and to keep that small town feel as much as you can. And it's tough, I mean, when you've seen downtown change, but it's been a tremendous difference. Just, I mean, I put it in perspective from when I was a new officer, in 2006. Downtown, it wasn't a place I would. The first place I think of to take my family to get dinners, and now it's completely different. My wife and daughter and I have a pick of different restaurants. You feel more comfortable. I think it's more family friendly and more usable now. Right. So how do we do that and continue that, but keep our small town beach feel? I mean, because that's the reason I love the city. I grew up surfing here, and I don't want to lose that.
As downtown develops and that economic push starts to broaden out, one could imagine developers coming in and saying all the way down Coast Highway, gee, I'd like that spot for a new resort hotel, or that spot, or that spot, or that spot. How would you react to that?
So this has been something that's been important to me. I'd like to keep density where it's at already in downtown. And protect our neighborhoods like South Oceanside and those areas. And I think that's why people move there. You have this single-family neighborhoods close to the beach with that neighborhood feel. And I think but that's a great question, because as we're seeing, you hear legislators in Sacramento talk about the housing crisis, and there's several bills going through right now that if they pass, and it looks like they possibly could, it's really going to change all of our neighborhoods throughout the state, and that's a concern to me. I mean, one SB 9 could split lots, add ADUs, and it takes all the local discretion away. And I think those coming changes I'm very concerned about.
How do you then start to address the issue of housing affordability? We're in a world now where, particularly in all of the coastal cities, finding affordable single-family housing is almost impossible for anybody who is relatively young and has not acquired at least a pretty sizable down payment.
Absolutely, and it's a challenge. Our police and firefighters, it's easy for me to put myself in their shoes now, where I couldn't afford a house if I was a new police officer or firefighter. I was lucky when I bought mine, but I think there's so many factors to housing affordability. I don't think it's just supply and demand. I mean, I think what the challenges you're seeing across the country, interest rates have been historically low for a long time. I think those are all contribute. And, I have a feeling there's going to be some relief maybe in prices, but I don't know if coastal neighborhoods will ever be that affordable again.
Right. Does this lead you to think that there needs to be a opening up of spots inside what land is available, what infill is available, for more multifamily housing in the city?
And if it's in the right spot. And so we brought our housing element forward. And one of my important, I discussed it with staff and at the council meeting, is so we have the regional housing needs assessment numbers, and we have about 5,500. We have to make land zone for about 5,500 units. So we have half of that right now. But I think we're going to need to change zoning to get about 1,400. But we can do that without going into our single-family neighborhoods and keeping it in transportation corridors, but which is important. I just really, I think we need to keep the character of the single-family neighborhoods, and we can have denser developments where density already exists.
Are there going to be spots where that can happen, though?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you reimagine what retail looks like or underutilized commercial properties right now, but that's another challenge is our jobs to housing ratio. We need more jobs and more better paying jobs.
Oceanside's always historically been low on that ratio.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, that's a long-term goal, and I think our council's pretty united on that. It's not an easy fix, but it's something every time we make a land use decision that should be in the back of our mind. We do little things as we can to try to increase jobs and increase opportunities for Oceansiders, but it is a challenge.
Right. One of the ways you can start to think about Oceanside along the coast anyway is a tension between development downtown, the resources poured that direction, and development in South O and resources there. Is there a tension there? Should there be?
I think it's important to our residents that they keep the character of their neighborhoods. I know I've said that a couple times,
right.
but it's concerning to me some of the things that happen with density bonuses and different means that developments or projects can come through and the council has very little discretion to say no, whether it's parking allowances or, there's a lot of different things someone can do to build a denser property, and sometimes it's not always the right fit for the neighborhood. So I understand, I have the same concerns.
Yeah. We'll change gears with you just a little bit. With your experience as a police officer and a POI for law enforcement and the trauma that the country has watched over the last couple of years with the George Floyd murder, the BLM protests, so on and so forth, can you give us a sense of where you think Oceanside is with regard to these kinds of issues of social justice and the way it treats people?
So I think we've been, in California kind of has been at the forefront of modern policing and building that trust and transparency. And I think we do a better job than most other states, in San Diego County especially. And that's one thing that I think we excel at, is we've worked and built those relationships. And that's what you have to understand as a law enforcement leader. The time to build a relationship with the neighborhood groups and the different, or community groups and different leaders is not after something happens, is you build that before so they understand and you have that relationship. And you do that daily, and that's by we have to hire good officers. I said this is the most important 3 things you need to do for modern law enforcement. You gotta hire the best people. You gotta provide them the best training. And then you have to provide them the best frontline leadership and culture. So that, and if you do those 3 things successfully, I think you're ahead of the game.
I recall from newspaper coverage years ago when I was still in the business, there was always a question in Oceanside about whether or not we had enough law enforcement, enough fire stations, enough fire protection. What's the state of things now?
I think that is our biggest challenge in the next year, up there with the homeless crisis, is I think we're 20 officers short right now. I think we have less officers on the street than we did in 2000. And it's tough. A lot of it is recruitment and retention right now. It's, I think a lot of people that would have become officers are rethinking their decisions.
That's certainly true nationwide. All sorts of cities have lost large quantities of officers in the last year or so.
And that is a tremendous challenge because, for an example, if you're hiring, you have 5 openings, you want 500 people to apply because you need to have that big pool so you can get the right officers with the right temperament, the right experience. If you only have 5 officers or 5 individuals that applied for 5 spots, it puts you in a bind. And I think that's going to be a big challenge going forward.
Do you think there's been a change in the quality of people stepping up and saying, I want to serve that way?
No, I don't think so. It's just, I think people that would really probably be a good fit and really would have wanted to become a police officer are probably just rethinking that right now. And that's going to be a challenge, is how do you continue to make it an enticing profession and get the very best of the best. I mean, that is, you have to hire the best people so you don't have those problems. The easiest way to deal with a problem officer is not to hire them in the first place.
Sure. Although the other side of the bad side of a problem officer problem is there's growing criticism nationally about the doctrine of qualified immunity, which protects officers from being personally liable for basically bad behavior while on duty, unless that is a behavior that has already lost the immunity kind of thing. Do you have any sense of where you think we ought to be on that?
There's two different issues when you're an officer. There's the issues of integrity, stealing, lying, character issues that you really have to be strict with and really pay attention, know your officers, and if you see those, nip it in the bud. But there's also making a mistake in the heat of the moment. And and things happen so fast. I have a handful of stories where it's over and done with before I know it was happening. Sure. And you have to make these split-second decisions. And I think we're going to get to the point where our officers are so afraid to make an honest mistake when things happening really fast that they're either not going to take action, they're not going to be as likely to confront a criminal or someone they know is doing something illegal, because at a certain point, it's going to be, they could risk their job, their house, a lot of different scenarios for them. And that's going to be a challenge. And that's how you don't, for policing, the way you really solve crime is it's not usually the radio calls. It's the proactive policing and talking to the neighborhood, saying what's happening. Well, this person's breaking into houses and he's been seen with a gun, and going out and putting in that legwork and trying to prevent it before it happens. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges is how do you encourage good, ethical, proactive policing that really prevents crime and violent crime. Our major cities are above 30% increase in homicides this year. And so if we're not going out there and proactively looking for guns and trying to prevent that crime, we're going to continue to see that happen. So,
has there been any particular or visible increase in crime in Oceanside that corresponds to the increase in some of these major cities?
I don't have the numbers, but I mean, it's nothing that I've seen that's alarming yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a rise in violent crime, as is happening across the country. I think we've taken a lot of proactive steps, whether it's with gangs or community policing, and so I think we're prepared to handle it. But again, when it comes down to manpower, if you're short 20 officers, that takes away from some of the special units, and I really do think that's going to be how we handle that shortage of officers in the next 5 to 10 years is going to tell us how successful we'll be in policing the city.
Yeah, one of the generally accepted theories for trying to not suppress, but eliminate or take away the opportunity for crime is having good jobs, economic development. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see the city doing, say, in the next 5 years to try and bring up its level of jobs and strengthen this local economic economy?
So I think we're doing it already. Is we are a very business-friendly city, and I guess during the pandemic was a good example. We all worked very closely with the restaurants that were closed, the different businesses that were impacted, and we got a great response. And we did everything we could to make it easier for someone to keep their business and not lose it during the pandemic. And having our business owners having that support and knowing the city is there to help them succeed instead of get in the way and help them fail. Will be the best way for us to entice new businesses to come and provide jobs for our residents.
I know I've read that on a national basis, many of the business closures are tagged as small business. Do you have a sense of what Oceanside lost during this pandemic?
I know there were some casualties of the pandemic, but and that's the challenge is we are a small business city. I mean, that's the backbone of our economy is our small businesses. So I know obviously there was some businesses that were hit harder than others, but I think comparatively with some of the actions that we took, we saved a lot that we could have lost. I think we're one of the only cities that did a grant program out of our general fund. And it was a small amount, up to $7,500. And it wasn't to save a business long term, but everything was moving so slowly that it was just more to act as a bridge and just help get that business by a week or 2 weeks so that we can really get them the federal money, the PPP loans. So that's just an example of the things that we've done to really to keep our businesses going. And it wasn't easy.
Right, I'm sure not.
I mean, there was a new hurdle every week that we had to address.
Right. Associated with that sense of economic development and a healthy Oceanside is sand on the beaches. Talk about that.
So that's it's one of my most important issues. I talked about during the campaign. I talked about the homeless crisis and sand on our beach. So right now, if you go south of Tyson Street or Wisconsin, even at low tide, we don't have really much beach left at all.
Right.
And it's a long-term issue. It started with the harbor being built 60, 70 years ago, and blocked all the sand flow from Santa Margarita River. Yeah. So we also, as rivers get dammed and you have less sediment flowing to the beach, it just compounds the problem. So, but I think that is one of the trickiest issues, is how do we find an appropriate project, get it permitted, and fund it and complete it. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it is extremely important to our residents.
Who in the city has tasked with the responsibility of trying to propose solutions?
So we have right now our public works mainly oversees issues related to sand replenishment. Right. But I think that's also space we could, depending on funding, I'd like to see a dedicated position to lobby and really put us in a good position and focus on sand almost full time. I mean, I think we get about $300 million in tourism spending a year, and if we don't have a beach, we're not going to get much. And most of that is obviously west of the 5. So, right. And it's not just that; it's our #1 recreation in the city. So it's not expensive. It's from people from all neighborhoods can go and enjoy it. It's my wife and daughter and I are there 3 or 4 days a week in the summertime. And one of our secret beaches, not secret, but one of the places down southern part of the city, it's just not there right now. Right. So and that's a challenge. Is we've had the Sandag projects in 2001, and then 2011 or 12 again, where they pumped and replenished our beaches. Right. And they're healthy for a year or two. Right. And
does the city have the financial resources to actually tackle this on a long-term basis?
Right now, with our general fund, I don't see that happening. It's a lot of money. I mean, just our surplus was $600,000 out of a $170 million budget. Right. And if you wanted to, you could spend $5 to $10 million a year maybe on replenishment. That's why I think we're going to have to find a creative solution and either partner with our neighboring cities or Sandag and find something that doesn't impact our neighbors to the south. And that's always been the challenge with a groin or jetties is, does that stop that longshore transport to the south? And what other options do we have? A sand bypass system. So that's what coming to council in August are some options for what we can do to fix it. But it's, again, I think you hit. There's 2 big issues with that. It's funding and permitting for that project. And
is permitting likely to get more complicated with the Biden administration?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's I think our challenge is more with the Coastal Commission and partnering and making sure we're all on the same page and getting something that works for all of our cities. Because it's not just a problem that we have. Right. Carlsbad, Encinitas, it's an ongoing issue. So that's what it's going to take is partnership with our other cities.
Does the California Coastal Commission have a standing, committee or standing group that looks at sand-related issues?
I'm not a part of it with the Coastal Commission, but for San Diego, for Sandag, I'm on the Shoreline Preservation Working Group, so we have one locally. Okay. And it really lets us partner with all our different cities to the south and talk about creative ways and what we can do. And then it's encouraging because everyone on there is dedicated to having a clean, accessible beach. And but again, going forward, how do we get it approved and paid for?
Before we wrap it up, this has been kind of a tumultuous last 4 months for the council. There is a recall effort going on against Corey Jensen. She was originally appointed just as you were originally appointed, and some others have gotten onto the council that way. What do you think about this whole business at this point?
I think it's unfortunate, to put it mildly. We have a lot of really critical issues in the city. My hope with an appointment was that not only would it save $400,000 to $600,000 of an election, but also let us move on with city business. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened.
Right.
So I think it's a challenge, and I hope we can move forward and get some important work done.
You've not taken a position one way or the other about the recall then?
So the situation's unfortunate. I think there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Okay.
In general, I think recalls are costly and not the most productive for a city. But again, this is an important issue, and I haven't received the clarity that I'd like to have.
One final question. As you do service on the city of Oceanside, do you have aspirations above the council?
I think earlier on I did, and now they slowly wane.
Okay.
And I think the one thing I've been disappointed watching the partisan politics. Mm-hmm. And you go to the state and federal level, and I think it gets in the way of good policy. Mm-hmm. And instead of doing what's right, it's you're saying yes because someone said no, or the opposite. And I think in the city we can still really work on good policy. I mean, the issues you brought up, the sand issue. There's nothing partisan about it, and it's problem solving. And how do we how do we replenish our beaches? And those are problems I enjoy. And I think the farther you go up, the less of that you do.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sitting down with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.